All right, Denise. So thanks for participating in our workplace readiness week, and I'll let you take it away. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the invite as well. My name is Denise Henninger, and I am indeed a sign language interpreter. Um, I will give you a little background of what I currently do, but I'm mostly going to talk about sign language interpreting. I have several different jobs currently. I'm a manager at the Center for Students with Disabilities at Santa Monica College. That's my current full-time day job. I did start there as a sign language interpreter. Actually, that's where I did my internship, was at Santa Monica College as a sign language interpreter, and made my way through the ranks and currently am a manager there. I also am a sign language interpreter with my own company. So I do interpreting for various things, which I'll talk about later. And I also am a freelance interpreter working for several um, agencies as an interpreter. So, as you can see, I went to Purdue University. I'm from the Midwest, so that's where I went to my undergrad, and that's actually where I started to learn American Sign Language because I met somebody who was deaf in one of my in my dorm, and we became friends. He was one of our friends in our group of friends, and I learned sign language through him. And then later, I moved out here to California, and I went back to school to Pierce College for what's called an interpreter training program. So that's where I learned more about American Sign Language as a language, honed my skills, and learned the process of interpreting. So I received my interpreter training program credential at Pierce College. And then later I went back to school more recently for my master's in a different field related to my daytime job at Ball State University. I have been a sign language interpreter for about 25 years. I cannot believe it. It's been a very long time. Um, yeah, and I've worked at Santa Monica College since I started my career in interpreting. Um, when I graduated my interpreter training program, before you graduate, you have to do a certain number of hours in a work setting through a mentor with a mentor, and just kind of by connections and friends, I met somebody at Santa Monica College. It was not close to where I live. It's still not close to where I live. Um, and I did my internship there, and I just kept working there ever since.
Very cool.
So, describe the work I do and what does a regular day look like? So, I'm going to focus more on what my days used to look like when I was a full-time interpreter. Um, I was a part-time interpreter at Santa Monica College. So I worked there for 20 hours a week. And then everything else I did was kind of filling in the gaps of my schedule and working as a freelance interpreter or working at other educational institutions as an interpreter. So I would go to the classroom and I will sit in the front of the classroom and my deaf student or students would be sitting opposite of me and I'm interpreting everything that the instructor is saying. I'm interpreting anything that classmates are saying. And that's kind of what I did for educational interpreting. And gosh, for freelance interpreting, you could just be going anywhere. You could be going to a doctor's appointment. You could be going to the DMV, Social Security, somebody's meeting at work. There's a lot of deaf folks that work at Apple, so there's a lot of work at Apple that you could be interpreting. Going to Amazon, I particularly don't interpret at Amazon, but I know many people who do. Um, Concert interpreting is my big current thing. So that's what I do is a lot of performance interpreting. I also work at Disneyland as a park interpreter. This year is my 15th year as a Disneyland park interpreter. So really anywhere that people are, you could be interpreting in those situations. I just got a request today for an event at a sports center for rugby games this weekend. So I'm going to be staffing interpreters for some rugby games. So honestly, you can find work in almost any single area of the world, really, that where a deaf person might be working, where they might be enjoying an activity or going. You might be there as an interpreter. And what inspired me to become an interpreter was my friend who I met in college, who I mentioned. Um, that's really what kind of prompted my career is just meeting somebody who was deaf and who used interpreters. And later in life, I was like, that was actually a really interesting part of my life. Let me revisit that. And that's what I did. So that's where my journey started was meeting that friend. And after that, like I said, I moved to California and I found that Pierce College had an interpreter training program. It's very close to where I lived. So I thought, why not? Let's see where that takes me. So I went through their program, and from there, I actually, like I said, I was working at Santa Monica College, and I also did another mentorship at a place called Sorensen Interpreting. Sorensen is a video relay interpreting company. So what they do is they interpret calls between hearing and deaf people. So the interpreter and the deaf person would be on a video call, and the hearing person would be on the other end of the line. You don't usually see them. And you interpret that phone conversation. So I actually started working there and I did a mentorship there, which was to prepare me for my certification. Because as an interpreter, we can get several different certifications. There's an educational certification, and there's also a national certification, plus other specialty certifications as well, like legal and medical. To get the national certification, there's two parts. There's a written part, which has a lot to do with what you learn in school. So most people try to take that right as soon as they leave their interpreter training program, which is what I did. Once you pass that written portion, you have a performance portion. So what that consists of is you have to interpret both ways. So you have to do the actual interpreting where your hands are moving. So you're hearing somebody speak, whatever the content of the exam is, and you're interpreting that with American Sign Language. And then it also works the other way where you're watching um, deaf folks signing and you have to voice what they're signing. So there's two different parts. It's that receptive part and the production part as well. Um, so the job at Sorensen Video Relay prepared me in unbelievable ways to take that test. Um, because you're doing a lot of voicing for deaf people, which doesn't always happen maybe in other circumstances where there might be more listening involved, such as in a classroom where it's a lot of listening. This is a great day in the life of my job. Um, so so I took my performance test after I did my mentorship with Sorensen, and I worked at Sorensen interpreting calls as one of my side jobs for about 10 to 15 years, I believe. I left a few years ago from that job just because time constraints. This is a day in the life of my current life. So these are all still shots from concert interpreting. That's a huge part of what I do now. Like I said, I started my own company for performance interpreting. So I do a lot of interpreting at concerts and different venues around LA. And that's a really fun and fulfilling part of my job, honestly, because I love music. I love performing. So it really kind of taps into all facets of what I love. So there I am interpreting at some K-pop concert. K-pop is really, really big right now and really big with the deaf community. So we have a lot of requests for K-pop.
Very cool.
Let's see, pros and cons of the profession. I think the pros are you can really make this job whatever you want it to be. Like I said, there's so many fields that you can work in. So if you have an interest in aerospace, there's a lot of deaf folks working in different aerospace companies. If you have an interest in education, educational interpreting is huge. Um, there's potentials to work remotely because there's things called video remote interpreting where you might be working from home interpreting for appointments like meetings, medical appointments, etc. And the interpreter is at home, but the other parties are maybe in the office or in a doctor's office, and you're working from home. So there's remote work possibilities as well. So there's just a lot of different avenues of where you can take, where you can take the career depending on what, where your interests lie. Um, the cons are if you if you're the type of person who needs something steady, it can be a little tricky to find something really steady. Um, Educational work has definitely has a lot more stability, and that's kind of where I started. So that's where I ended up was in education primarily. But if you're a freelance interpreter, there is a lot of like hustling you have to do because you have to fill your own schedule. Um, and if you're freelance interpreting, you're going to be having to save money for taxes, something that you'll have to deal with a lot in the future. So that can be kind of tricky if you're just freelance interpreting to fill that schedule and make sure that you're motivated to get the work that you need. And if you don't have that stability of like a 9 to 5 job, something like that. But there are ways to do both depending on, what you want. If you want stability or if you want flexibility, you can find both, avenues for either one of those. Um, the hardest professional obstacle, I think, is really honing your craft as an interpreter. It's not easy. Interpreting is not an easy skill to develop, and especially when you're working with a lot of different people. Just like when you're hearing people speak and how people have different slang, have different accents, have different ways of speaking, that all exists with deaf people too. So not only are you trying to navigate like the nuance of a person's, the way that they speak and trying to like see their accent, but you're doing that in your second language or maybe your third language, depending. Um, so it is difficult. It's not easy learning how to voice for people in a language that you learned later in life. So you definitely have to put in a lot of hard work to be around the community, immerse yourself in the community, so that you can develop those skills. And I would say, the most impactful part of the job, you're really making a difference in somebody's life. And it's a tangible difference that is happening in the moment because of what you're doing. So, I mean, just imagine yourself if you don't have access to communication, if you can't understand or communicate with those around you, it can be very, very isolating. It's a very isolating feeling for deaf people who have to rely on another person just to interact with the world. So, as an interpreter, you're really making such a difference in their life, I mean, it could be in their education, it could be in their, the life of their health, their career, and they're depending on you for information and for access. So, it's pretty special being able to do that. Um, for me in particular, right now, I am really lucky that I get to bring a lot of joy into people's lives because I do a lot of performance interpreting, like I said, at concerts and at Disneyland. So um, maybe what I'm currently doing isn't necessarily life or death, but I get to bring joy into people's lives, and I think everybody needs more joy in their lives. So it really is it's moving and it feels really special when you get to be a part of, somebody's experience that they're going to remember for many, many years to come, maybe their whole life, they can look back on these experiences and think like, wow, I got to do this and I got to fully experience it because of the access that was provided to me.
It sounds like a very niche career. Is it in high demand?
Yes. Yes. Oh, yes. Um, we have an interpreter shortage across the country. So pretty much anywhere you go, there's going to be a need for interpreters. And there's a lot of assignments here, in the LA area that go unfilled because there's just not enough people. And we also need more trilingual interpreters. Trilingual is if you know a third language, and here mostly trilingual will consist of Spanish. So if you're a native Spanish speaker and you can interpret from Spanish to English to American Sign Language, not only can you earn more money because of that skill, that specialty skill, but it's also in high demand. So we always need more trilingual interpreters as well.
Hear that, everybody? They're hiring.
Everywhere, everywhere. So these are a couple other pictures of some things that I did recently last year. I did interpret co at Coachella last year. I didn't go this year. I had some other personal obligations with my own interpreting my own company that I had set first, but I was there last year, so that's me with my pass, getting my pass, and on stage for I don't even remember who that was. Who's Elon Musk's ex-girlfriend? That DJ?
Grimes?
Yeah, Grimes. So that second one was I was interpreting for Grimes. That third one I was interpreting for No Doubt on the main stage. And the last picture is actually me and my husband because I actually got to interpret for my husband's band. He was playing at a festival in Las Vegas last year, and they had a request at the festival for an interpreter. And one of the acts, I interpreted for other acts that day too, but one of them happened to be the band that my husband's in. So I even got to interpret for his band. And that was really, really cool. That was pretty awesome.
Was this at Sick New World?
Yeah, yeah,
And for students that don't know, while the artists are singing, you are interpreting what they're saying, correct?
right, right. So you're interpreting everything that they're singing. Sometimes even when you're on stage, you might have to kind of interpret the music as well, so they know what's going on musically, and you're interpreting all of the music and the lyrics, everything they say in between their songs and everything like that. And it really is a specialty skill because there's a lot of acting that goes into it and is involved. You don't want to just stand there and just interpret the lyrics and look boring. You want to look like um you're meshing well with the show. You don't want to do too much so that you're making a fool of yourself and outshining the artist, but you want to find that fine balance so that when somebody is watching you, they're really understanding the musicality and the intensity and the emotion behind what you're actually hearing on stage. So you're conveying all of that through your face, through your body, through your hands.
Do you have like a teleprompter or do they give you the script before?
It kind of depends on what show and what area you're doing. So, for example, in smaller venues and regular shows like what I normally do, we'll have a music stand and we'll use an iPad so we can see our lyrics. But we do a lot of prep work beforehand. So we're not always, very rarely are we given a set list from the artist. So we have to rely on our own tools and resources, the internet, and do all of that prep work on our own before. And then we practice our interpretations. We listen to, the music, watch shows on YouTube, everything that we can to prepare for the show beforehand and practice. And then when we're there, we usually use the iPad for lyrics because, it's very difficult to memorize, that many songs, unless you know all of the words. But, most of the time when you think you know all the words and then you actually look at the lyrics, you're like, oh, I've been singing that wrong for years. So that happens too. But for things like Coachella, what we do is a little bit different because we're on stage. And it's more like widely accessible for a larger audience, whereas in a venue we might be closer to where our guests are sitting. We're like right in front of them. But here we're on a stage, kind of close to, off the side of the main stage. So at things like Coachella and Sick New World, what we'll do is we'll have a team in front of us helping us with the lyrics. So they're kind of like feeding the lyrics to us, and then you're sort of watching your team and taking that in and providing your interpretation. It's very challenging. It's not something I would recommend doing right off the bat at the start of your career as an interpreter. It's kind of a goal to work towards because it does require a lot of additional skills on top of just interpreting skills. So um, maybe not, maybe not the first few years of the career, but down the line, something definitely that's fun to work towards.
Very, very interesting.
What life lessons has my work taught me? Um, Interpreting will teach you a lot of patience. It will also humble you in ways because you will be challenged. Um, you're challenged every single day. This is a career where you never stop learning because language is always evolving. Um, both English language, American Sign Language, and whatever other languages you're working in. Language is not static, it changes and evolves. So you're just always, always learning, and you're always working with different people. Um, so yeah, I mean, I've I've just learned to be very patient and trying to be understanding and kind to everybody that I'm working with because it is challenging to come in as an outsider, where most people don't need that third party to engage in conversation and communication. So, patience is key. And just the diversity that exists in the world. Every person that you work with, every deaf person has a different story, has a different, life story that has affected in different ways their access to communication and the way that they communicate. Um, so just the differences that exist among people is really amazing. Um, and I think just being humble about your work and always being ready to learn and kind of grow with the people that you're working with. Because I think that's really important in this profession is to be humble and kind of just allow yourself to kind of take yourself down a notch, even if you think you're the greatest interpreter in the world. Um, people want to work with people who are kind and generous and patient and have a good attitude, right? So that's, I think, the most important things to keep in mind whenever I mean, probably working in any profession, to be honest, but especially in this profession because you're working with people. You've got to be a people person and be, genuine um, to who you are and to, the service that you're providing to others. Um,
Can
where
you
do I
see
see
yourself
myself?
doing this in 10 years?
Well, in 10 years, let's see how I hope to retire from Santa Monica College. Um, and I I think probably in 10 years I'm likely going to be moving back towards full-time interpreting. So once I leave the college, I do plan to go back into interpreting in a um, kind of more immersed way. So I don't know, maybe I'll test out video remote interpreting. I don't really do that right now because I don't have the time. So I don't can't have any more work on my plate, but I hope my business grows in 10 years. I've had my interpreting agency for since August of 2022, so it's fairly new. So I just hope that my business is at least where it's at now, maybe has grown a little bit in 10 years. And I can see what other changes have happened in the interpreting profession since, I'm kind of on the outskirts of it at the moment. I do a little bit of freelance interpreting, but I'm not like really in there like I used to be. So I'm curious to see what kind of changes. And who knows? I mean, technology could change the game immensely in 10 years. So who knows what's going to happen? I think it's exciting. I think it's a little bit scary. But we'll see where technology takes us. Let's see, my advice. Um,
Any tips and tricks for anybody interested in doing this as a career?
so if you are interested specifically in becoming an interpreter, I would definitely advise you to, if you're, want to become an ASL interpreter, to find a deaf community, to, find deaf people to hang out with and find people to talk to, because immersing yourself in the community and the culture is the best way to get started. As far as school, if you wanted to move on into this profession, I would recommend finding a college that has a program either for deaf studies or an interpreter training program, depending on what route you'd like to go. For your certification, you do need a bachelor's, but the bachelor's does not have to be specific to deaf studies. So you could go, many different routes of, degree and certification. But CSUN has a great deaf studies program, and they have a great mentorship program for their students who are learning to be interpreters. Long Beach has a great program as well, and there's other community colleges, like I went to Pierce College. Um, I think Cerritos, I believe, and or El Camino has have programs as well. So there's different options for like 2 year and 4 year, depending on, what what route you want to go. But definitely just finding deaf people and making friends and, just starting to learn even, outside of school. And there's a lot of resources online. Just make sure they're legit because there's also a lot of fake things online with, especially with American Sign Language. So there is a lot to be learned online if you want to do like self-study beforehand.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Does anybody have any questions for Denise? Go ahead and type it in the chat box or tell your teacher to type it in for you. Who has been your favorite performer to interpret for?
I will have to go with No Doubt because they were the first show that I ever interpreted, and then I got to interpret that for them at Coachella last year. So it was a huge full circle moment for me. Um, but I really am enjoying K-pop as well. Because the community is just so fantastic. And we've built like a little family and culture. So it's just so fun being part of that community.
Denise, how long does it take on average to learn ASL?
Um, so, I think it kind of depends on how you're learning. If you're learning from a person because you have to, like I did, I learned just basic communication pretty quickly. So just that basic communication could take maybe like 6 months. But if you're actually trying to learn the language in a more linguistic way to become an interpreter, then that's going to take longer. So usually what the progression will be in school, you would take ASL 1, ASL 2, and then once you're in ASL 3, you start taking your interpreter training courses. So you start learning the process of interpreting. So usually like 2 years of the language, and then you start learning interpreting as well. I see another question. If it's difficult, um, oh, is it different to interpret a different language? Um, I don't know. I don't know a lot about spoken language interpreting. I know a little bit because I work with one in our K-pop scenario who's a spoken language interpreter. I would say that the biggest difference is that when you're going from a spoken language to a spoken language, there has to be a lot more delay because you have to hear something, process it, and then speak it. So you can't like both parties can't be speaking and hearing at the same time. But for sign language, when somebody is speaking, I can be interpreting at the same time. So I don't need both parties to stop for me to do my job. I do still have to wait and hear what the message is. So I'm not just like listening and going like word for word because then I could be misinterpreting the message. So I still have to wait to get enough like understanding of what the message is, but I can still be producing a message while I'm still listening to the spoken message being, hearing it in, and then it's more simultaneous is I guess what I'm trying to say. So there is a lot of differences between interpreting for spoken language versus American Sign Language. And also the culture, because there's like a huge cultural difference between deaf culture versus other hearing folks. And of course, each maybe language also has their own culture, but deaf culture is certainly a thing, and there's a lot of nuances um, to learn just culturally when working with deaf folks.
Lastly, do you think there should be more interpreters in public spaces?
Um, I think there's a lot of work that could be done to improve access and accommodation. I think we're limited basically because of the law and where the law limits us, and also because it's expensive. So, I mean, things like restaurants, maybe not restaurants per se, because there's other ways to communicate, like through text, writing back and forth, things like that. Um, but I think that there are places where access could definitely be improved. I'll just give you a small example, like for my situation. At shows, for example, some venues, there's only specific places where they can put interpreters. So if somebody buys a ticket that's in a closer area, they might get moved back if they want to have their interpreter. And that's not ideal because they spent more money to be, closer to the front. So that type of access, I think, does need improvement, but it's a that's kind of a long-term fight, and a very difficult one because there's a lot of factors in play, especially like in my situation, like fire marshal laws and things that are logistic with the spaces that we're confined to. So yeah, I mean, ideally, we would have interpreters everywhere, but there's also other programs and stuff too. There's like apps now where you can get interpreters on demand, um, and places could, pay for that sort of service to have an interpreter where they could just, have an app and a phone and be like, boop, we need an interpreter. So things like that are starting to change a little bit as well.
It might be hard to gauge your annual salary, but what do you make hourly?
Um, Hourly, I right now, it could be anywhere from about 40 to over 100 an hour, depending on what the situation is. I would say for a new interpreter, between like 35 and 40, depending on where you're working at. Um, and yeah, if you're doing something that's like legal or medical, you have more years of experience. It's a niche specialty. Sometimes could be over 100. Um, Maybe not quite that much. That's a little, but every once in a while you can get to that range. But I would say average would be maybe like 45 to 85 an hour. That's a pretty big range, but like I said, it depends on where you're working. It depends on what kind of certification and experience you have.
We are going to have to conclude this meeting pretty soon, but a student is asking if you can show us a sign language, like word.
Yes, what would you like to know? No bad words.
How are you?
Okay, so you can say hi like this, kind of like almost like a little salute. You can say hi. How? You're gonna have kind of do your hands like this, two thumbs up. They're going to be together like this, and you're going to go like this. How? Some people go like out with both hands. How? I just do it like this, a little bit shorter. How? The word are you kind of drop and you just say, are you? So, how are you? Even better would be something like, what's up? So you take your middle fingers like this, middle fingers, and you're going to go right here, kind of like on the upper part of your chest, and you're going to flick it up. What's up? What's up? What's up? And then if you want to answer, an answer that's very common is just to say like fine. And it's like this, five finger, your thumb is going to tap your chest. And that's kind of like, all good, fine, fine.
Very neat. I guess maybe the last question would be, do you believe ASL should be taught in school, high school, for example?
Um, I know there's a lot of ASL being taught now, so it is being taught a lot more than before. Is it mandatory? No, of course not. It's an elective language so that you can take Spanish, American Sign Language, French, blah blah blah, whatever you want. Um, I mean, I don't think it should be required, no, because it is still a language just like anything else. I think Spanish and American Sign Language. I think those are the top two other languages, obviously Spanish first, before sign language, that are most used in the US. So it is something that is used a lot in the US, but I think what's more important is for those who have hearing loss. I think it's important that they are taught both English and sign language simultaneously. So I think it's a little bit more important for deaf folks that they have access to ASL growing up rather than the other way around. And that's a whole nother conversation for another time. Um, but yeah, I think it's definitely important for deaf folks they to learn sign language um, like right out the gate. Very, very important.
Well, I want to thank you tremendously, Denise, for participating in our Workplace Readiness Week. Thanks so much for presenting to our students, and perhaps you might have inspired the next generation of ASL interpreters.
I hope so, because we definitely need you guys.
All right. Thank you, Denise, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye, everybody.